These never-ending wars in the Middle East at the behest of Israel. Bibi Netanyahu was the one that called for Americans to invade Iraq, Libya, Syria, Afghanistan, and now Iran, and we've done it. We're told Israel can defend itself. Okay, but why do we have currently 2,000 troops that are in Syria under the guise of fighting ISIS?
So Candace Owens was recently on the Piers Morgan podcast talking a little bit about why the U.S. should stop supporting Israel, some of the worst ramifications to come from it, a little bit of the history about it, and why this issue has come to a boiling point recently. Now, some of you guys said that this was a particularly fiery interview, so I say let's do it. Let's watch and react. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
Now, you've asked me to come onto your show to explain to you how the now very fractured MAGA movement is feeling, and I'm telling you that, right?
No, it's really, I find, honestly,
I
find the split in the conservative movement in America genuinely fascinating, because it really is a genuine schism now.
Yeah, there's a genuine schism, and it's only going one direction. And by the way, we shouldn't even call this a schism, because trying to dress this up and delude us into believing that the MAGA movement is what has Meghan McCain cheering, John Bolton cheering, has Mark Levin cheering. The literal faces of the Never Trump movement are saying this is real MAGA. Yeah, we're not going to be that delusional.
You're on the same side as Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez. How do you feel about that?
You're asking about the MAGA movement. The MAGA movement has always been a movement that explicitly did not want to keep involving our sons and daughters in the Middle East. So we have not changed that position.
Yeah, you know, this is a really good point, actually. Find me a 2016 Republican never-Trumper that was against this bombing escapade and escalation in Iran for the sake of Israel. You can't. You find, you know, the Ben Shapiro's of the world, the Mark Levins, the John Boltons saying, yeah, we're behind Donald Trump here, and if you're against this, you're false MAGA. Well, I'm not part of MAGA at all, but this seems like a scheme to draw Trump more to the neocon side. Not that he wasn't complicit to some part of that. When you're going to nominate Mark Levin to a Homeland Security post on that committee in the U.S., this is the natural result. When Marco Rubio becomes your Secretary of State, this is the natural result. It's who you surround yourself with, but there's also a psychological operation on the neocon side to draw him that way. Even after Trump, you know, spent some of his last days on the campaign bashing Liz Cheney by name. So Candace makes a good point here.
If AOC was always anti-war, then she should have thrown on a red hat in 2020 and in 2015 and joined the MAGA movement. That would have been fantastic.
But are you saying America should never use any military action? You're on the same side as Greta Thunberg when it comes to the Palestinians being but are you saying,
murdered every day.
are you saying,
I am. I'm aligned.
Okay, but are you saying that America should never use any military action then?
No. I'm not saying America can never use any military action. In fact, what I said earlier was I could get behind a regime change in Israel, because I think it would fix a lot of issues that are happening and that has been happening to America over time.
Like I said, why wouldn't you want it in Iran? I mean, I'm reading an Amnesty International report from 2024.
Because Iran is not negatively impacting. I'm answering your question because Iran's regime is not negatively impacting America on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, and Iran has no ability to threaten the United States militarily either. This war was waged on behalf of Israel. And if you're going to talk about regime change in Israel, like, I think their government's criminal. It's tied to ours, my government, the United States government, which is criminal too. But I don't believe in using military force there either. That just opens a new can of worms for other entangling alliances. But yeah, I think Netanyahu's a war criminal committing a genocide in Gaza, and he wanted to desperately take eyes off that to support this war in Iran. He's not going to get that for more than a few weeks now, hopefully, unless he keeps fanning the flames, you know, resuming hostilities, which might be possible because Israel did violate the ceasefire. So yeah, Candace is right here. You know, it's easy to look at this thing and say, you know, this is in America's security because of all the propaganda they've tried to sell you with the death to America chants. These words are violence chants that the right would have made the liberals made fun of the liberals for saying back when Biden or Obama was in office. So she makes some good points here.
When the leader of Iran says death to America, why doesn't that concern you?
There you go.
Okay, that's a chant. And by the way, I want to be very clear.
Why
are they chanting death to America? Why are they chanting that? That's kind of a random thing. Like, I know,
because they want Americans dead.
But why do they want why are they specifically chanting as opposed to saying, I don't know, death to China or death to Russia? What is it specifically about America?
Well, they say death to America, death to Israel, death to the United Kingdom, actually.
Oh, okay.
Death to pretty much anyone that wants to stand up to them.
Could have had something to do with our actions in the Middle East, is why I'm saying that we need a change in foreign policy. It maybe has something to do with just like killing 1 million Iraqi civilians, okay, because Bibi Netanyahu got on a congressional stage and said there are weapons of mass destruction, and we took that to the bank, and there actually were no weapons of mass destruction, so we just killed 1 million. It could have something, I could be crazy, it could have something to do with our actions in the Middle East.
This is a great point, too. You know, my good friend Scott Horton always says the war propagandists that want more war and more prolonged occupations in the Middle East, what they do as part of their propaganda strategy is they truncate the antecedents. They pretend that everything that happened yesterday was the beginning of the history, and nothing before that had any impact in why these people in the Middle East seem to hate the United States government. And I don't even think they hate Americans in general. They hate our government. And honestly, sometimes I can't blame them because of what we've done. All the support for Israel, all the constant forever wars for Israel's sake, and duplicitous people and neocons in the American administration, by the way, too. In, you know, Iraq and Syria and Libya and Afghanistan, she just named a lot of them. And, you know, I hate to say this, but Osama bin Laden pointed this out in his letter to America, where he declared a fatwa saying it's your support for Israel, it's your sanctions regime against Iraq, which has caused, you know, 500,000 deaths. That's a reason for this. And it's because you've militarized the Arabian Peninsula. And that was incredibly prescient this week when it was the militarization of the Arabian Peninsula that put our soldiers, U.S. soldiers, in harm's way. And we had to rely on Iranian restraint that they didn't attack them in kind. They actually tipped Trump off to that. So she's entirely right here.
The fact that we have 2,000 troops stationed in Syria right now under the guise of saying that we're fighting ISIS, while at the same time we know that Bibi Netanyahu funded the al-Qaeda adjacent front because he wanted to overthrow Syria.
And the U.S. supported overthrowing Assad, allying with al-Qaeda to do that. Look up Operation Timber Sycamore. USA dumped $15 billion into that mission. It only finally came to fruition last year, I think in December of last year. Late in Biden's term, where actually Assad was finally deposed. But she's right about that, too. You know, that was done on behalf of Israel, who wanted Assad out of there.
Again, expand their borders, immediately take on territory, and sell us absolute nonsense. We're talking about funding Hamas. Bibi Netanyahu funded Hamas. There is footage of Bibi Netanyahu saying this stuff on camera. So it's just so ridiculous to me to pretend that they're in some predicament, that they may be eradicated soon, which is why they have to keep funding all of these terrorist groups and then pretending that they're victims of terror, when in fact they are people that are imparting it worldwide. You know, I just think that, like I said, Generation 9/11 has grown up, and I think that our eyes are very clear here, and we recognize that our relationship with Israel has become increasingly problematic, and it always was problematic. So I'll again ask the questions, Piers. I'm asking you because we're having a conversation. Yeah. Name something positive that our Zionist AIPAC foreign policy has brought to America.
That's a good question. I'm so glad she's asking this. This is a firebrand interview, by the way, and cheers to Candace on this one. She's absolutely right about the problematic entanglements that the U.S. has gotten involved in Israel by our aid through Israel, constantly fanning the flames of tensions throughout that region. And it's totally apt to slam that and blame the Israeli government to some extent, and the United States government for allying with that branch of our foreign policy apparatus. So yeah, she's right on. This relationship has brought America nothing but woe, inflation, debt, forever wars, new enemies, you know, U.S. troops imperiled in a region that we don't belong in. This is the result of empire building. These are the fruits that we reap from empire building. It's what Pat Buchanan condemned, rightfully so, when he said, you know, you can't have a limited government world empire. You can have limited government or a world empire. You can't have both. When you accept the latter, you make any chance of having the former and actualizing the former impossible.
Well, I think the positive side of, if you want an answer about that, is that America has been Israel's steadfast ally because it recognizes as a country that Israel has been under an almost unique multifaceted threat on its border for a very long time from people that want to destroy it. And that you may not see that as a benefit, but Israel has been very supportive to the United States in many ways. Right, so why shouldn't
And I just want something concrete that has been benefit. Like, we got better in America in this way. Just name something. Gas prices, just something that the average American can relate to.
Well, you're not going to have a correlation between Zionism and gas prices in America. Of course, you're not.
No, I'm just giving you an example.
Well, actually, you are. If you fan the flames of tension with Middle East entities, you kind of eradicate your ability to have good trade relations with them. That I actually really disagree with, but for the different direction that Pierce was trying to go at.
Just tell me one thing that they have
because
what your argument here is like, well, you get a pat on the back and you can say that you helped this country, which was formed in 1948 by pretending to be refugees, if you will, and being invited into the homes of Palestinians, the horrific story
of what happened.
Well, they weren't
pretending to be refugees. They were people fleeing a Holocaust.
Let's be clear. Let me finish my statement.
What do you mean pretending to be refugees?
Let me finish my statement. When I say pretending to be refugees and being invited into the home, you would think that these people were helpless and were going to be grateful to the people that hosted them. People like Muhammad Hadid, Bella Hadid and Gigi Hadid's father, who was an infant at this time in his mother's arms. She had just given birth. They had invited these refugees because of the goodness of their heart. And then one day they return home and their doors are locked and they are told that if you try to enter, you are going to be shot and killed. That is the reality of how Israel was established as a state. Okay.
This is true. In 1948, the UN passed a resolution that called for a mass land distribution project from the Palestinians to Jewish individuals. And I say Jewish individuals instead of Israelis because there wasn't really a conception of Israeli. A lot of these people were Ashkenazi Jews. Some of these people were, the fathers of modern Zionism, like Theodor Herzl, who was secular. And what that did was it caused a rift between the people that were in that area of the world, Palestine, many of which, by the way, were more Semitic than the people coming in that were Jewish. And this displacement caused this tragedy that's unfolded over the 80 or so years thereafter. Some of the Palestinians still have the keys to their homes that were just seized from them by these globalists at the UN. And it caused a war. And, the newfound Israelis won that war. And there's been war ever since periodically. And that really is the truth of things. It's hard to say otherwise. But, many people will pretend that this was just some kind of, democratic process internal to Israel. It's just bogus.
That is not a stain that you can wipe from history. Most Americans growing up actually believe what happened was that, okay, it was a little messy. That's what happens after wars. Borders get changed. But at the very least, they were given money. I mean, you've lived here for hundreds of years. Here's money for your property. No, that's not what happened. They were forced out of their homes at gunpoint.
Listen,
and it's wrong. So we get to be the nation pat on the back. According to you, the thing that America gets. Let me finish. I'm going to let you finish. It's your show. We can. But let me finish. But your argument is that what we get to be is that nation that keeps supporting it as they continue to move their borders in this way. Now we're seeing that incursion into Gaza, and we are certainly going to see it by the end of this administration in the West Bank, because like I said, that is why Miriam Adelson gave Trump $100 million.
Yeah, we've seen that expansion in terms of claims in the West Bank and in Syria and in Lebanon. They want to expand to greater Israel. They're cleansing Gaza. They're establishing what are called concentration zones. They'll even say that language in describing them, including in Rafah. So this is no doubt true. They're being ambitious and expanding even now. So, yeah, she's totally right about that.
Look, as you know, I oppose what the Israeli government is doing now in Gaza. I oppose the expansion of settlements on the West Bank. I think all of that is completely wrong. I do think America supports Israel because it remains the only democracy in the Middle East, and that's an important...
They're not a democracy. Stop saying that, Pierce. You know better.
Well, they have elections.
It's not a democracy.
They have elections.
Well, there's elections in so-called communist countries too. They won't exactly say that Russia's a democracy, but there are democratic elections in Russia. Actually, their presidential election is more democratic than the U.S. presidential election because they have a national referendum rather than a small group of electors electing the president. So, this is just propaganda when you say certain countries are democracies and certain ones are not. You know, they'll say Ukraine's a democracy. Of course, they've suspended their elections during wartime so Zelensky can remain in power, expand conscription acts, continue to squash political dissent, drag 50-year-olds off the street to fight in that perilous war. So this is propaganda too. Israel, like the United States, is a form of oligarchy. I think we're witnessing that now. And, you know, the whole democracy thing is a big mockery of what actually transpires.
But who gets to vote in those elections? Do the Gazans get to vote in that election?
Well, the Israelis get to vote in Israel, obviously.
Okay, so you're basically saying America had a democracy, we had
Israel
laws that said Black Americans couldn't, Black Americans
Israel
couldn't
moved
vote.
out. It is indisputable that Israel moved out of Gaza in 2005, and there was an election, and Hamas got elected. Right now,
yeah,
I
and
agree.
that's because
I agree with you. I agree with
but
listen,
Bibi
hang on.
Netanyahu was on camera saying that they were going to fund Hamas into power.
Listen,
so they orchestrated
Candace,
that because if they wanted to create
Candace,
the
I haven't
solution.
finished. I agree with you that Netanyahu wanted to cause a split between the Palestinian Authority and Hamas. It was divide and rule. It was a catastrophically bad strategy.
Yeah, this is widely documented too. She was right about that. He's been on camera admitting this, and funding to Hamas transpired even 2 weeks before October 7th, when the head of Mossad went to Qatar to exchange the funds. This has happened over time. Netanyahu believed that funding Hamas was actually a good thing for Israel because it would prevent the establishment of a Palestinian state for all time, because he thought that it would destabilize the PLO, destabilize, Palestinian culture and kind of their sensibilities regarding these political matters, and make it so there's no negotiating partner at the table that anyone would accept or anyone would believe would be feasible to negotiate for a Palestinian state. So Candace is actually completely right on that too.
And it led to what happened on October the 7th over a 20-year period. There's no doubt it was a terrible thing that Netanyahu did, one of the many reasons I think he should go. But there was no doubt that the Israelis pulled out of Gaza and allowed them to have elections, and they elected Hamas, and the rest has been disastrous.
Okay, they pulled out people from Gaza due to that election and then sent them to West Bank settlements to expand their presence in the West Bank. I think they now have occupied about 66% of the West Bank now, about 2/3 of it. And they blame everything that's happening now on Hamas elections from 2005, where, first of all, there are, I think, a majority of children in Gaza. There's a huge number of children comparatively to the adults that live there that had no chance of voting in that election. And many of the people still living now did not vote for Hamas. So you're saying like a very small minority or subsection of the populace that voted for Hamas is guilty, and thus we have to cleanse Gaza of all these people, of all these innocents that had nothing to do with it. I think that's a bogus argument. It's always been a bogus argument, but you hear that rammed down the throats of people that question U.S. support and bankroll for this madness.
Because the Israelis funded, because Bibi Netanyahu, they funded Hamas. I don't
disagree with you, but they still had elections.
So it's like we rigged an election, but look what the election results show is that they wanted to put Hamas into power. And so when we talk about who is funding these terrorists, the answer is Bibi Netanyahu. And I don't want to get into his corruption trials, but every single person watching this right now should go pursue the documentary, The Bibi Files, because it is absolutely stunning to understand.
I believe one of the reasons.
This man is.
I believe one of the reasons.
Let me answer the question, because you still haven't given me anything other than like you guys get a pat on the back for supporting this created nation in the Middle East. I also just like to say all of the bad things that we have gotten because of our continued relation with Israel. First and foremost, the open borders. And you can relate to this. People in the UK, they just can't seem to connect the dots.
All right.
Oh my gosh, what's happening
let me
here?
Get a word in.
But I want to say this. Okay, we don't understand where all these refugees are coming from. Oh my God, where are all these refugees coming from? Who's funding them coming over into these borders? Well, this is what you get when you keep supporting these nonstop wars, when you keep bombing where these people live. And it's not even just a conspiracy, by the way. If you're like, oh, well
actually, you're wrong about this, because the vast majority of people coming into the UK illegally are not coming from war-torn countries in the Middle East. They're actually economic migrants.
Okay.
So that's not true.
Okay, but let's connect that.
Well, there's a Venn diagram there too, I would say.
That When you say economic migrants, are we talking about like
people who literally want to come to the UK for a better life?
And when Gaddafi was heading up Libya and the country was on the up and up and he was working with the United Nations, and then all of a sudden he warned that if you collapse Libya and turn it into a place where refugees are escaping, that this is going to be your problem, Europe. He warned that. So then it actually happened. And now we're just calling them economic migrants. We're going to pretend
I'm not
that we had
talking
nothing
about
to
people
do.
coming from Libya.
Okay, where are you speaking about?
Well, for example, I think it was last year, a third of all the people who came into the UK on the border on the small boats illegally, it turned out were young economic migrant males from Albania, which last time I checked, we hadn't invaded. So look, let me pull you back to something you said, which has caused a lot of controversy, which is this issue of dishonorable discharge. Let's take a listen.
I do believe that if war in Iran is on the agenda, and that appears so, get dishonorably discharged. Who cares? Who cares? Why should you go die in a foreign land? You now have the benefit of 2020. You can see, think about those men and those women who died because they were pitched that they were serving their country because there were weapons of mass destruction, right? They were serving their country because the Taliban, they were serving their country, whatever, and these people gave up their lives. And ask yourselves, for what? And the answer to that question is for the elites. They're like toy soldiers.
When you said that, were you aware of the repercussions if people dishonorably discharged?
So just to put this into context, this is like the Q&A, live Q&A portion at the end of my show. And being facetious, but also being completely honest, that they should begin to consider, and that was somebody asking, what should we do? Like, should we leave the military? Because they also
do you regret
are recognizing that. No, I don't regret saying that. I don't regret
you know the
having
repercussions if you do discharge dishonorably.
Okay, well, I would imagine that the people that are in the military who were going to, if they were going to listen to my podcast and they were going to dishonorably discharge, that they would know the consequences. So,
yeah, and to me, as long as you're not hurting someone else, if you get dishonorably discharged rather than fighting Israel's wars in the Middle East, you deserve commendation, not criticism, by the way. So, yeah, I'm on board with that. I can see that being defensible. Now, you shouldn't hurt anyone or do anything to defraud someone that would cause you to be dishonorably discharged. But that's what I think Candace was getting at, that it's senseless to continue fighting in these empire-building schemes for the sake of foreign countries and foreign regimes and duplicitous people within our own government. That's what I think she was getting at.
It's completely ridiculous. And again, we see this over and over again where people can't answer the broader questions. They try to suddenly peg in, well, you said this one thing. No, the broader conversation that we are having.
Candace, it's not a small thing.
No, let me finish. Let me finish.
You're basically you're encouraging U.S. servicemen and women to dishonorably discharge.
You play a clip, and I'm trying to answer it. You can't do that. You ask a question.
Well, you're trying to downplay it,
and I'm responding. No, I am. No, you're trying to upplay it. Is what the issue is. This is exactly.
I'm just repeating.
He is trying to upplay it, and hey, man, I admire her spark right here. She is not letting him run over her like he does to other guests, and this is pretty darn impressive. I don't think I've seen another guest on his show do this, and she is handling this extremely well.
What you said.
You're playing what I said, and I'm responding to it and telling you that the broader piece of that conversation, when you have troops that are now asking that question, is they are recognizing that America is in steep decline, that our military comes back and they are treated like dirt, that a lot of these men, and we're talking about decades, white American males come back and they're told that they're racist and they're treated like crap, that they're white supremacists, that they have a different vision for this country. So why are they dying in these overseas wars for Bibi Netanyahu? Okay, and let me again try to answer that question that I asked you at the beginning, which is, what has Zionism won America?
I'm not going
what
to keep coming back to the same thing.
Let me finish. Why?
No one ever answers it in earnest, and that is pretty telling. She makes a really good point there, because they never point to something tangible that you can take from the U.S. relationship with Israel from the perspective of someone in the United States, especially a taxpayer, let alone a politician. Well, politicians get their pockets lined by AIPAC. That's what they get. But you know what? I don't care about that. I care about what affects individual Americans that are forced to bankroll this, because it's not the politicians' money going to this. They get paid out of the public treasury. It's American money that's paying for this nonsense, and we've had enough of it.
Won't you let me answer that? Why won't you let me
actually
say what people are recognizing? You come back and there are open borders and you're told that you are racist, okay? You come back and you're told that you are racist if you don't want open borders. Meanwhile, you're sent overseas to defend Israel's borders. It's a nonsense. And who's funding these open borders?
True.
According to Barry Weiss, and I quote, Barry Weiss said this verbatim. The Jewish connection to the refugee is not a conspiracy. That's something that we are very proud of. And she was referencing the organization HIAS, and she says it explicitly, which she said what was started by them in the 1880s, which includes immigrants that have come in like Sergey Brin. They are still the organization that is operating at our border right now. Okay.
So she's absolutely right. Regardless of how you stand on the border issue and U.S. immigration policy in general, there's no question that the U.S. war regime cares far more about the borders of Israel and Ukraine than they do the United States and Texas and New Mexico and Arizona and California. Certainly not. Much more attention is paid to the exact borders of Israel and Ukraine. That's a Ukraine first and Israel first mentality. That's what we're seeing play out.
Okay, that is problematic that we have open borders while we continually and routinely are told that we have to defend somebody else's borders. Okay. And again, these never ending wars in the Middle East at the behest of Israel. Bibi Netanyahu is the one that called for Americans to invade Iraq, Libya, Syria, Afghanistan, and now Iran. And we've done it. We're told Israel can defend itself. Okay. So, but why do we have currently 2,000 troops that are in Syria under the guise of fighting ISIS? And like I said, we know Israel themselves fund terror-adjacent militants like they did to overthrow Assad. And we're done with the BS of, okay, well, they weren't really involved, Israel in Afghanistan, because even when we fight those never-ending wars, Israel wins. Everybody knows that our boys were out there in Afghanistan guarding poppy fields, okay? And do you know what happened after we allegedly, quote unquote, lost in Afghanistan? What happened to all those poppy fields, those poppy flowers that our military was guarding? Well, the opioid crisis hit America via the Sackler family, who quite literally built the School of Medicine at Tel Aviv University.
Well, she is really hitting on all the terrible ramifications of these wars, and man, is she on fire. I've seen very few people articulate the case like this, you know, with such passion and so many facts behind it. So I'm very impressed by her appearance here. You guys were right to say that this was an interview that you have to watch and react to. It really shows the duplicity here. The only thing that I think I would disagree with her on is I don't think actually Israel made a particular push for the U.S. to occupy Afghanistan and to stay there for a prolonged period of time. All four other countries she noted, yeah, absolutely, because they appeared in the clean break memo. We knew that existed since 96. There were going to be 7 countries overthrown in 5 years. Wesley Clark, the supreme NATO commander, blew the cover off this, and I believe his 2004 presidential run, it was either in 2003 or 2004, he appeared on Democracy Now! Talking about this. But I actually don't think Israel made a big push for the U.S. to occupy Afghanistan. That's the only caveat I'm going to say. I don't know enough about the poppy field connection here, so I'm not going to weigh that much into it. But all 4 of those other countries she named, Libya, Syria, Iran, and Iraq, that they wanted regime changes in, that was Israel's desire, and they've made it plain. Netanyahu made that plain with Iran. He wanted the Libya model to apply there.
So we're just done, okay? And there's no way that we're going to go backwards. We're not going to allow you guys to emotionally condition us to go, oh, well, we got to protect Israel because of the Holocaust. It is over. They're imparting a Holocaust. America would like off this crazy train.
That's true in Gaza. I mean, they make no bones about it sometimes. When you have Moshe Feiglin, the former Knesset legislator, coming out and saying that every Palestinian child's the enemy, when you have U.S. villains like Brian Mast saying there's no such thing as an innocent Palestinian, doubling down on supporting this stuff, when you have Randy Fine looking at a picture of a Palestinian child being pulled out of rubble, clearly dead, and someone asks, how can you sleep at night seeing this? And he says, quite well, actually, thank you. That's when you know that this is a treacherous and despotic and ghastly war regime that connects both Israel and the United States. I make no bones about it. I'm not just blaming Israel for this, and I'm not just blaming the United States for this. This is a criminal relationship perpetuating this brutality on a mass scale that I want no part of, and Candace is right to point this out.
Okay, for the benefit of viewers who don't know what I was talking about, under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, Article 19, dishonourable discharge can result in forfeiture of all pay and allowances up to 5 years confinement, which is a pretty heavy penalty to pay.
Yeah, I'd want my kids to go to jail before they fought for Israel. I'll say that honestly.
Okay.
Based, man. based, as long as you're not hurting someone else, it is better to do that than die in fruitless wars overseas. That's for sure, or support them in any way. So I'm glad she's doubling down on that.
Okay.
I would. I have 3 sons, and I'm going to be honest with you, Pierce. I'm glad you told me that consequence. I take that consequence any day to them being sent back over in a coffin because they died for Israel. So.
Okay, but I think the one thing you're missing, look, I come from a big military family, a lot of military in my family, and a lot of people fighting wars on behalf of the United States are not doing it because they think Bibi Netanyahu wants them to. They're doing it because
some of them do that, and they write into my show and I answer the question.
But many of them won't, and they might be offended by you suggesting that's the only reason they're doing it.
And they can watch your show, and they can be offended all they want, but I think it's more offensive the way that our military is treated, the veterans are treated, and the gaslighting that takes place when we're told that we have to defend everybody's borders but our own.
I actually think...
Yeah, the honest patriotism of many Americans that serve in the military is twisted by duplicitous actors in government, by presidents, by the Prime Minister of Israel. Like, that might be an understatement, how much they're twisted to support his madness. But that is true, that their honest patriotism is twisted in that direction by the rulers. A lot of them are not aware of it and come to that conclusion later. It's why Ron Paul had more support than any other presidential campaign in 2008 and 2012 among military officers and enlisted men. It's clear to see that that's the reason. But at the same time, you don't want to get involved in those things to the point that you're still in the military and you're rolling the dice that you could be sent over there for these perilous struggles. So, yeah, that's still a point worth making.
America treats its veterans better than almost any country in the world.
I mean, this has always been an open conversation, and I'm just saying that if my boys were being drafted to fight this war in Iran, I would be like, you know what, honey, take the other option. And that's not because it's cowardice. It's because when you sign up for the military...
Okay, but I would say that the pilots...
You are pledging that you are doing something that is going to better your country. But Candace, like I said, our country has been in steep decline since we have been part of this foreign policy.
Yes, soldiers and even politicians take oaths to protect and defend the U.S. Constitution, not the Israeli Prime Minister or the Israeli Constitution. That's the key here. That's the point she's making, and she's 100% right.
Which is just whatever Israel wants.
Okay, but you made that point. But what I would say to you is the only people so far that have been involved from the American military were the extraordinarily courageous and skillful pilots who flew these B-2 bombers and attacked the nuclear sites and got back safely. So there's been no troops on the ground committed at all, no declaration of war by the United States. We can quibble. Listen, I don't disagree with you. You bomb somewhere, you probably are at war with them. But there is no official declaration of war. Just as Trump, when he took out Soleimani and Baghdadi and he attacked Syria and so on, he didn't declare war on those places. And actually, it turned out that the apocalyptic warnings of those actions never materialized. So we shall see. I can't let you go without asking. Let me ask you just quickly about the Tucker Ted Cruz debate. What did you make of that?
Fantastic. It is finally the debate that needed to happen in America, because a part of this nonstop policy is this belief, as you said, Ted Cruz, that if we just do whatever Israel wants, that God's going to bless you. And it's quite ironic because it comes from Protestants, and their normal argument is that the reason why we had to have this fracture in the church was because of indulgences. There's nothing more indulgent than I'm going to be blessed if I just do whatever Israel says. And so because we are finally having that spiritual conversation, which is more important, I suspect there's going to be major changes in the United States going forward. And that is why you're seeing this fracture in the base already.
Man, Candace was on fire in this interview. Like I said, I was very impressed with her arguments, all of which were backed up by facts that Piers Morgan couldn't deal with almost at all. He still, by the end of that interview, couldn't answer one benefit that Americans get from our government's relationship with Israel. The one thing I'll say there at the end, though, she's right that many Protestants do support, endless funding to Israel. Many evangelicals do that. But a lot of it is a subsection. There are a lot of Protestants that don't as well. Just like there are a lot of Catholics that support Israel and a lot of Catholics that don't as well. So pinning it on Protestantism isn't right. Pinning it on dispensationalism is generally right, and all the ramifications of what came from the Scofield Bible, which essentially made it seem like Christians, based on its commentary in the Scofield Bible, that Christians are essentially responsible for funding the neo-nation state of Israel, which didn't exist back in the Old Testament, back when Genesis was written, that said those who bless Israel will be blessed, those who curse Israel will be cursed. And by the way, that's not always translated translated that way because it wasn't known as a nation state back then. You know, Israel was a people back then. They were a people with a relationship with God. So when you're saying that verse means that you have to support the modern Israeli state that happened, you know, thousands of years after that passage was written, it's really a really big scheme to get you to support the modern Israeli state, which Christians aren't bound to do at all. Jesus fulfilled the old law, by the way. Basically, every Christian believes in that. So she is totally right, though, about the pernicious results of U.S. support for Israel in basically every avenue, every theater of war that we've witnessed under the American system in, you know, almost my entire lifetime. Since I was a young child, the U.S. has been more and more involved in the Middle East. You know, from the bombing of the Beirut barracks to, you know, the Gulf War and to the sanctions regime in Iraq, the Afghanistan occupation for 20 years, Iraq occupation for 20 years, Libya, Syria, now Iran, you know, involvement in funding Israel's madness and what they're doing in the Gazan genocide. That is pernicious. And she's bringing it out in a way that few others have had the guts to do, and that rarely gets on the world stage in a format like this, on a show like this. So this really, again, this inspires me that this is getting out there on the independent media, on shows like Piers Morgan. He was in the corporate media, now he's independent. And she really handled this interview well, too. Piers can run over his guests. I've seen Piers Morgan just completely destroy guests by not letting them get in a word edgewise, and they're not successfully able to recover again because they can't finish their thoughts. Candace did not allow that to happen. She was a bulldog here in all the best ways imaginable. So, you know, props to her. Great interview, great points being made, but I do want to hear from you. What are some of the worst tragic ramifications of the U.S. relationship with Israel? Let me know down below in the comments. Do you think I got anything wrong or could have fleshed out anything better? And please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and please consider becoming a YouTube member or a Patreon patron to support my channel. I bow to you if you do that. It would be very helpful. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. I'll catch you in the next one.